On February 18, 2004, a baby girl named Anastasia was born in the industrial city of Novokosnetsk, Russia, and was subsequently placed in an orphanage. After spending 2 years there, she was finally adopted. Geraldine and Patrick Krejigel finalized the adoption paperwork, making Anna their official daughter. She then moved thousands of miles to join them in the Republic of Ireland, becoming the couple's first child. Geraldine worked as a senior manager in the legal department of the CIE, the State Public Transport Company. Patrick taught French at the Dublin Institute of Technology and would later retire. Even though Geraldine and her French-born husband had no cultural links to Russia, they were determined that Anna would not lose touch with her Russian roots. They learned about Russian culture and kept her birth name. Every year, she would celebrate 2 special days: her birthday on February 18th and her adoption day on August 10th. Anna was spirited and feisty, and one could always tell when she was around. She was incredibly athletic and loved swimming and dancing. She would spend loads of time in front of the mirror practicing her dancing and having fun, as well as singing. Anna was described as very sensitive and innocent, and during her early years, while she was happy, she did have several health problems. She was left almost deaf in her right ear after a tumor was removed, in an operation lasting almost 6 hours. She would also have problems with her sight. As she entered her teens, she suffered from a painful condition, sometimes seen in adolescence, that occurs when the bones grow faster than the muscles. Emotional problems began to appear as primary school started to come to an end. On one occasion, her parents were alerted that Anna had told a teacher that she was feeling suicidal. Anna's resource teacher told Geraldine and Patrick that was terrified for her to make the move and go to secondary school because she was so innocent. She feared other students would take advantage of this. Her mother and father met early with the senior staff of the secondary school to highlight their concerns about Anna being a potential target for bullies. Much of the bullying was about her height. By the time she was 13, she was already 5'8" and looked older than she actually was. The bullies also mocked her for being adopted, telling her she didn't have real parents. Geraldine and Patrick took screenshots of some of the messages and showed them to the school. But even after she started there, the situation didn't improve. That October, Anna came home hysterical and incredibly shaken. She had been walking back after supervising a disco for young children when 4 boys approached her. One continuously asked her for sex before he touched her. They filed a complaint with the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, and the boy was cautioned for his actions. After painting a black eye on herself, she was suspended from school. Geraldine believed that her painting the black eye was an expression of her internal pain and turmoil. There were also fights at the school, one of which resulted in a suspension. All she wanted were friends her own age that she could be with, but she had few. As Anna's inner pain continued to mount, she began to set up fake social media accounts to send bullying messages to herself. Following this, Geraldine demanded that Anna gave her access to all of her apps so that she could check them. On Sunday, May 13, 2018, with exams the following week, Geraldine and Anna had plans to sit down and study. But as there was a family gathering in a few hours, they decided to relax instead. They decided to watch films and eat popcorn. As the party was due to start soon, Geraldine ordered a pizza and Anna walked into Leak Slip to go to the Chinese takeaway instead. During that evening, Anna and her cousin went to her bedroom to make a YouTube video. Anna loved YouTube, and it was her favorite of the social media apps. Her videos were about clothes, makeup, and dancing, and she had accumulated around 100 subscribers. While most of the comments were positive, some of them were threatening and abusive. One told her to go die, and another said they would have her executed. As the party wound down at around 10:30 p.m., Anna headed to bed. May 14, 2018. Geraldine was usually the first one up in the morning. Anna reminded her that she would be leaving school at 2:30 to attend her weekly counseling session with Kildare Youth Services and would need a note to get out of school. After writing the note and giving her a kiss goodbye, Geraldine left to catch the train to go to her meeting in Dublin. The plan had been for Anna to eat lunch at school before walking to her counseling appointments, but she decided to head home to eat before going to her session. After finishing her counseling, she came home and headed to her room. At 4:02 p.m., Anna rang her mother, But as she was in a meeting, she couldn't answer and sent a text replying to say that she would call her shortly. Geraldine and Anna regularly called and texted each other throughout the day and always made time to talk to each other. Her father, Patrick, was in the garden relaxing when he heard the doorbell at 4:55 p.m. Opening the door, it was a boy that Anna vaguely knew. As this boy is a child, he will be referred to throughout the rest of this episode as Boy B. When Patrick told her he was at the door for her, she was confused. While she knew who he was, they weren't friends. Despite this, she went down to speak to him. Patrick saw the pair standing in the hallway whispering, thinking it wasn't unusual, and he would later remark, "I think a lot of teens do it." She ran back to her bedroom to fetch her hoodie that her mother had bought for her. The hoodie was a distinctive black and white one. Beatrice reminded her about her exams and told her she needed to study. Anna said she wouldn't be long, gave him a big smile and left. Patrick had forgot to ask her where she was going, and after opening the door, he saw the pair walking towards St. Catherine's Park. They didn't appear to be talking, and Boy B, who was carrying a small backpack, was walking ahead of her. At 5:10, Geraldine was back on the train and heading home and was free to call Anna back. Anna didn't answer, and her mom didn't leave a message because she would soon be at home and able to see Anna. When she got home, Patrick was in the garden and told her that Anna had gone out with Boy B, who had called for her. Geraldine was immediately worried as, in her words, nobody calls for Anna. Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Geraldine texted her daughter a 2-word message. "Home now. Answer me now or I'm calling the police." Geraldine decided to walk to the park to see if she could see her, but her search turned up nothing. After dinner, she headed back out in the car and drove around. Anna loved going on long walks while she listened to music, but she still couldn't be found. Once she returned home, she and Patrick headed on to Facebook to try and find Boy B. They did vaguely know him, but not at all well. They didn't know who his parents were or whereabouts he lived. Geraldine rang around but could find nothing. Anna had now been gone hours. Patrick and Geraldine visited a friend of theirs, John Cribben, who was a retired detective who could advise them on what to do. He told them to go straight to the Garter. The parents went to Leakslip Garter Station, where Geraldine explained that it was highly unusual for Anna to not get in touch with me. But for the Garter, there was no reason to be immediately concerned. The first job of the investigators was to find out who Boy B was. They found his address on their computer system and headed over to his house. Garter Kana Muldoon asked the boy about the day's events. He said that he had called for Anna and the pair had walked over to the park, but he had left her there at 5:40 p.m. The following day, the search for Anna continued. Her parents, joined by family and friends, combed the local area on foot, speaking to anybody they could think of who may have known where their daughter was or where she could have gone. A family liaison officer had been appointed to support Anna's devastated family and help them through the investigation. Anna's parents gave them photos of her, including her wearing the black and white hoodie. On May 15th in the late afternoon, a press release was issued requesting the help of the public. Guardia seeking the public's help in tracing 14-year-old Anastasia Creaziel, who was last seen at her home in Leakslip, County Kildare at 5 p.m. on Monday, May 14, 2018. Anastasia is described as 5'8", black shoulder-length hair, sallow skin, and slim build. Sergeant John Donn had the task of going back to Boy B's house to ask him more questions. This time, the boy explained that he had called for Anna on behalf of another boy, his friend, who will be referred to throughout the rest of this episode as Boy A. Anna had a crush on Boy A, but he wasn't interested in her. He said they had walked to the park where he had left her with Boy A before returning home to do his homework. Sergeant Dunn decided to take him back to the park. He showed the officers where they had entered the park and where he had left. The Garter marked all of these locations using the GPS on his radio before he took the boy home. As Dunn was walking back, he was stopped by a man and his son. The man had heard about Anna going missing and suggested the Garter check the back of the local sewage treatment plant, as teenagers tended to hang around there. Later that day, he realized this was the father of Boy A and the boy with him was Boy A. The statements of the boys were incredibly important to investigators. Officers had no reason to believe that Anna had been hurt. and as the boys were the last ones to see her, any information they could give them was vital. On Tuesday afternoon, both boys were brought back to the park. They led the way with Dunn, Sergeant Hussey, and Boy A's father following behind. As they walked, Dunn noticed Boy B was leading them on a different route from the one he had shown them earlier. The boys came to a stop on the path near the BMX track. Dunn and Hussey both saw them exchange what they would later describe as a glance or a look. The decision was made that formal statements needed to be taken so they could clarify their exact movements. Boy A and Boy B were taken to Luke and Garda Station with their parents. Boy B was sticking to his story. He said that the first indication he had that anything had been wrong was when the guardie had been at his front door the day before. "I have no clue what happened to her," he said. The statement Boy A gave was detailed. He explained that Boy B was one of his best friends. Boy B had called by his house after school as Boy A was doing his chores. They arranged to meet in the park later, and when Boy B arrived, Anna was with him. Boy A said he knew her from school, but not that well. He said, "At one stage Anna said to me, 'I have something to ask you. I was wondering if you wanted to go out with me.' I was surprised. Came out of nowhere. I kind of knew she liked me because she kind of asked me out before." He explained that he wanted to tell her gently that he wasn't interested in going out with her. "I said, 'I'm sorry, but I'm not interested.' She didn't answer. She said nothing. She walked off. She looked annoyed and sad at the same time." By this point, Boy A said that his friend Boy B had left. Boy A had notable injuries and was walking with a limp. When he was asked about this, he claimed that he had walked on alone before being attacked by two males, who grabbed him and pulled him to the ground before kicking him. He said that the attack ended when he got to his feet and kicked one of them in the head, causing both of them to run away from him. Investigators were rather unsure about this story. Whilst he did have injuries that were consistent with some kind of assault, with his arm and leg being injured and his face being cut, his account seemed strange, especially with his assertions that he had kicked a grown man in the head and caused both of them to flee. Despite their concerns, Gardaí were assigned to investigate his claim of being attacked. Boyer was taken to the Garda headquarters in Phoenix Park, Dublin, where a photo fit of the man he claimed had brutally attacked him was put together based on his descriptions. When the witnesses who were there in the park that day were spoken to, not one of them had seen anybody in or around the area that matched the photo fit. Nobody on the CCTV footage bore any resemblance to them either. As the following day rolled around Wednesday, May 16th, the search continued to gain momentum. There were now serious concerns that Anna had come to significant harm or even been killed. Assigned to the lead investigation was Inspector Mark O'Neill of the Garda station. All members who were coming on duty in stations in both Kildare and North Dublin were briefed about the ongoing investigation. The decision was made to bring in a specialist search teams, including a sub-aqua unit who conducted searches of the River Liffey and other bodies of water. The Garda Crime and Security Branch were tasked with analyzing mobile phone data to try and trace Anna's movements, and the Civil Defense provided 60 people to help in the investigation. Thursday, May 17, 2018. A derelict 19th century farmhouse called Glenwood House is located on the townland of Cold Blow, west of Locum. Built in around 1800, it sits on just over 100 acres of farmland on the edge of St. Catherine's Park. It was inhabited up until the 1990s before it was left abandoned. By the summer of 2018, the house was effectively in ruin. It was a popular spot with teenagers who wanted to smoke and drink, and parts of the house had been gutted by a fire and the roof had collapsed in several places. That morning, Sergeant Declan Burkhill and his specially trained 4-person team were deployed to search the areas that included Glenwood House and a portion of St. Catherine's Park. After searching hedgerows and ditches and using maps and the methodical grid system, they made it to Glenwood House. Inside the house was dark. The windows were boarded up and little bits of light peed through a hole in the planks of wood that had been put over the glass. White said he smelled dried blood, and through the darkness, he could see what appeared to be a mannequin of some sort. He called out into the darkness but was met with silence. As he had been trained, he stepped into the room, confirmed what he'd seen before leaving to call for the assistance of his colleagues. Upon hearing White shout, "Find," indicating he had found something of significance, Virgil ran into the house. As the search team later headed into room 1 to confirm what White thought he had seen, a horrifying discovery was made. A naked body wearing only black socks was discovered. They had found the body of Anna Creasel. Her face was covered by her hair as if she had been thrashing it around. Scattered about the room of the abandoned building were pieces of her iPhone and items of her clothing. Near the body was a large stick and also a cement block that had bloodstains on them. The cement block also had knotted hair on it. Blood was on the walls and the carpet. After sealing off the crime scene, the search team awaited the arrival of Inspector John Gordon from the Luke and Garda station. A local doctor was called to formally pronounce the death. Within an hour, Anna's family were told that her body had been found and that they would have to go to the morgue to formally identify her. The missing persons case was now a major murder inquiry. It was the job of the state pathologist, Professor Marie Cassidy, to oversee the transport of Anna's body via a hearse to the state laboratory in Whitehall in North Dublin, in order for a full autopsy to be carried out that evening. The number of injuries that Anna had sustained was horrifying. There were 50 different injury sites, and listing where they all were took Professor Cassidy 40 minutes. The most serious injuries were to her neck, face, and head, and lacerations and bruises covered her entire body. She had died as a result of blunt force trauma. Following the pathology and forensic evidence, the guard suspected that the stick had been used to beat her to the ground shortly after she had entered the room. They then suspected that she had been hit 4 times with a heavy object, such as the cement block that had been found. Blue building tape was found around her neck, which she had 3 fingers inside of, appearing as if she had been trying to get it off. Although Professor Cassidy said there was evidence of compression to her neck, it didn't appear that this had been caused by the tape. There was also evidence that there had been penetration or attempted penetration, but Professor Cassidy could not determine what had been used to do this. She was also unable to determine whether or not Anna had been conscious at the time. After being beaten, it's believed that she was dragged over towards the window where the small amount of light was able to get through. It was likely here that the sexual assault was carried out. As her false nails were scattered around the room, this indicated that she had fought her attacker with absolutely everything she had. They also believed that it was likely that she knew her killer. Inspector John Gordon gave a statement. This news left the community shattered. People began leaving flowers in tribute to Anna, shocked that a crime this brutal could happen. In spite of the huge amount of forensic evidence that had been found at the scene, none of it pointed immediately towards a suspect, as all the fingerprints and blood belonged to Anna. But this wouldn't last long. At the Forensic Science Ireland lab, scientists had a breakthrough. Analysis of her top showed semen stains. A few days later, scientists reported that Anna's blood had been found on a pair of boots that had belonged to Boy A. His shoes had been taken away as part of the investigation into the alleged attack committed by 2 men. The blood pattern on the boots led the experts examining them to believe that Boyer had either been in close proximity when Anna was attacked or he had attacked her himself. Those investigating already had reason to suspect Boy A and Boy B. Their discrepancies and inconsistencies in the stories they had told set off alarm bells with investigators. Now they had the forensic that linked at least one of them to the scene of the crime. Both boys were from respectable backgrounds, and there was no history of disturbing behavior or difficulty in school, as one may expect to find in young offenders, especially ones who commit serious offenses. Boyer's phone had also been taken away for analysis of part of the alleged assault investigation. What was found on it only pointed the finger further in his direction. A screenshot of a list of YouTube videos was found that included the 15 most gruesome torture methods in history, horror films that will blow everything away, and Until Dawn, Get Jessica's Clothes Off. Until Dawn appeared to be a reference to a popular horror video game. Also found was a widely shared short story focused around a teenage boy who murders his family called Jeff the Killer. Whilst this could have been explained away as simply a fascination with the dark and macabre, another find on the phone did little to dampen their suspicions. A search had been made for abandoned places in Lucan. On the evening of May 23rd, the parents of Boy A and the parents of Boy B were told that a warrant had been issued for their arrests and they would be required to bring them into the station the following morning. Officers did not tell them that immediately after their arrests, their searches of both homes would be conducted. and what officers would find in these searches would be utterly horrifying. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Finglas Garda Station in North Dublin. By 2:30 p.m. on May 25th, the small and cramped interview room had become increasingly uncomfortable. With all 5 occupants inside, the room, which was intended for a maximum of 3 people, was becoming particularly tense. Over the past 2 days, Boy B had been questioned collectively for about 10 hours. His mother was present during the interviews, holding his hand throughout the first session. As the questions continued to be put to her son, she moved her chair further and further away, becoming increasingly distressed at the nature of the questions being put to her child. His solicitor had been silent for most of the interview and had started to clash with the interviewing Gardaí more frequently over their questioning of his young client. The pressure was on for the Garda detectives, Domhnall Daly and Damien Gannon. They only had a few more hours to get the boy to reveal what had happened to Anna 11 days earlier. It was also important that they spent time at the beginning of the interview to build a rapport and a non-judgmental atmosphere. So large parts of the first interview, Daly was asking Boy B about his hobbies and interests. He could take breaks whenever he wanted, and great care was taken to not push him too far. When he was at ease, the next part of the interview model was to let Boy B tell his story in his own words without being interrupted. Daly then began to challenge him gently and highlight where his story was inconsistent or improbable. The forensic evidence was overwhelming, but it was all against Boy A. They knew Boy B had played a role in taking her to the abandoned house where she was killed and that he had been there when Anna had died. But that wasn't enough. They needed to prove it. The process had been an exhausting one, but their questioning had caused Boy B to revise his account of what exactly happened that day. The day before, during his first interview with the Garda, he had repeated his story from the week before. He said that Boyer had asked him to call in at Anna's home and get her to come out. He was then told to bring her to Boyer, who was in St. Catherine's Park, so they could talk. He then said he left the pair before he headed home to do homework. As part of the investigation, officers trawled through more than 700 hours of CCTV footage from around the area where Anna had disappeared from. Gannon and Daly put it to Boy B that the CCTV footage did not match his version of events. His statement that he had taken a particular route home could not be corroborated by the CCTV. But Boyd stuck to his story and tried to come up with various excuses as to why the footage didn't match what he'd said. As the interview for that day ended, he spent the night in an office on the second floor of the station. The Children Act forbids children from being held in cells, so the Gardaí bought him bedding and cleared the office so that Boy B and his mother could sleep there. The station was closed to all other prisoners so that Boy B did not have any contact with any other adults. The following day, his fourth interview started. This was when his story started to change. His solicitor said that Boy B had reflected on his statements. "I'm going to retell the story of what actually happened," Boy B said. "What I told you yesterday was a lie." He explained that he and Anna had met with Boy by the BMX track in the park. Until then, Boy B had remained remarkably calm. As they were dealing with a minor, it was important that they knew exactly what his understandings of words like murder and detention were. He was able to give answers that were both to the point and accurate. Gannon asked him if he knew what arrest meant. Boy B replied that "You're detaining me for something that I did or might have done." His confession that he had lied did prove to be a turning point in the investigation. They could use the fact that he had lied to cast doubt on all his other previous statements. Whenever he said something that sounded untrue, they could remind him that he had previously lied and been caught out. Up until this point, Boy B had not shown any emotional distress aside from boredom and occasional frustration. As Gannon and Daly began to show him evidence from the abandoned house where Anna had died, this began to change. Due to his age, Daly treaded carefully with him so as not to appear intimidating. As the fifth interview got underway, however, the atmosphere dramatically changed. Daly's voice started to show signs of frustration, indicating he was getting tired of the lies he was being told by Boy B. You owe it to everyone to start telling the truth here. You owe it to your mom, to yourself, to tell the truth because unfortunately, a girl has been brutally murdered. Boy B had changed parts of his story, but he kept up his argument that he had no idea about what had happened in the abandoned house. Finally, in the late afternoon of May 25th, halfway through the fifth interview, the break that the police had been looking for finally came. Boy B was informed by Daly that a witness saw a teenager they believed was him walking towards the abandoned house. Boy B admitted to going into the field to look around but was adamant he hadn't gone any further than that. Daly said, "You're making this up as you go along, Boy B. I have to say, I'm presenting facts and evidence to you and you're changing your story to suit. You can't keep doing this." Boy B went silent. After a while, he asked if his mother could leave the room. But this wasn't possible as he needed a guardian with him at all times due to his age. When the solicitor recommended a break, Daly said, "I think we're at a crucial point here. The truth, that's all we want." Boy B took a deep breath. He then proceeded to tell the guardie that Boy A had gone into the abandoned house with Anna. "I left, and that's when I heard the scream. And then I ran. It was a really strong scream. I knew that it was Anna, but since Boyer was there she'd be fine. He'd protect her." The scream was like, really loud. Just before it ended it got muffled like someone covered her mouth. Boy B then started to cry. So did his mother. While the interviews with Boy B continued, what about Boy A? Upon his arrest, he was interviewed at the Clondalkin Garda station with his father and their solicitor. Just like with Boy B, they began asking him if he understood right from wrong. Leaving the door open for somebody is right. Tripping somebody up or stealing a chocolate bar is wrong. Boy A told Detective Guardy Marcus Rountree and Thomas Doyle. He said that whilst he had met Anna in the park, he wasn't with her at the time leading up to her going missing. He was shown CCTV footage of the park, and he pointed out two people that could have been the ones who attacked him. He said, "That's good news. Is there any more footage?" The figures he were pointing to were actually Anna and Boy B. It was now time for them to tell him about the forensic evidence that linked him to the scene of crime. After Detective Garda Doyle told him that blood belonging to Anna had been found on his boots, Boyer responded, "Are you joking me? You can't be serious." Boyer then said he needed some air, so the interview was poor so he could have a glass of water. When questioning resumed, Doyle said, "What I'm saying to you is the only place you could have got the blood on your boots was in that room. So, were you in that room?" "No," he replied. When asked about what the analysis of his phone had uncovered, he said the torture methods results had come up after he was looking for horror films online. He said torture films didn't interest him. In spite of the evidence, he confessed nothing. Most of his answers were no comment or I don't know. Thursday, May 25th. Inspector O'Neill received a call. It was an official from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Boy A could be charged with murder. An hour later, he was brought in a Garda van in the company of his parents to the Children's Court in Smithfield in Dublin. Following a search of his house, the evidence against Boyer continued to mount. In his bedroom, 2 mobile phones were found. They contained almost 12,500 images of a predominantly pornographic nature. One featured a man in a balaclava looking at a semi-naked woman. Another showed a man choke a woman as a second man watched. When a search of the memories of the phones was conducted, more disturbing evidence would come to light. It was revealed that several pornographic videos had been accessed online, with one title referring to Russian teenagers and another referring to a woman called Anastasia. Evidence of searches for child porn, horse porn, and dead boy prank in abandoned haunted school were also found. During the trial, however, this evidence would not be heard by the jury. Also in his bedroom, they found a backpack containing knee pads, shin guards, gloves, a snood, and a homemade mask. This would soon become known among investigators as the murder kit. The gloves explained why his fingerprints hadn't been found anywhere at the scene. The skull-like mask was particularly important. It was skin-colored and covered only half the top of the face. Eye and nose holes had been cut out and sharp teeth had been cut into the upper jaw and painted red. On the inside and outside of the mask, the knee pads, the gloves, and the backpack, Anna's blood was found. When the analysis of the semen found on her top had been completed, it was confirmed that the DNA had belonged to Boyer. He was then charged with aggravated sexual assault. The aggravated part refers to the extreme level of violence that had been used. However, the clothes he had worn that day yielded no forensic evidence. It later came to light that when he arrived home that day, he appeared shaken and upset, and he again repeated the story about being attacked. His mother then innocently washed his clothes, and those working on the case were sure that she knew nothing about what had actually happened. She believed her son had been the victim of an attack. This new evidence allowed for Boy B to be rearrested for further questioning. He was arrested again by appointment on the July 8th. He would be interviewed 3 more times by Gannon and Daly, who used the same methods they had used before, being gentle to try and get him to reveal more. Boy B said that Boya had worn the mask, which he described as a really cool mask that Boy B had made for Halloween the year before when Boy A had carried out the attack on Anna. He said that he had gone into the house by himself before picking up a stick there. He was still adamant that he had played no part in Anna's murder. He also described a conversation that he had had with Boyer a month before the killing. He described it as follows. "Hey, wanna kill somebody? No? Oh, here. Why not? Because it's retarded. Oh, come on. Who are you planning on killing? An archangel? In your dreams?" He said that his friend always said things like this, and he assumed he wasn't serious. He maintained he had no idea what his friend was planning to do on the May 14th. Daly asked him why he didn't do anything in the room. He replied, "Because I was scared. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. Because my brain was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do." He said that the day Anna had gone missing, he lied when questioned because he was just trying to forget about it and pretend nothing happened. He said he was ashamed that he had failed to help Anna and that he was scared of being framed by Boyer. "But you could have saved her," the detective said. "I know. Why didn't you try and save her?" "I don't know." Daly accused the boy of telling lie after lie after lie, saying, "You go and collect a girl that Boy wants to kill, and you bring her to an abandoned house, and you, in your words, hand over that girl to Boy, the girl he said he wanted to kill, and then you were deceptive afterwards. You lie to everybody. Lie, lie, lie. You're in a corner and you try to wriggle out of it by telling a story to suit. Do you see how this looks for you? I didn't know he would murder her," Boy B said. "I kept thinking to myself, this isn't real. This isn't happening. I kept thinking Boy wouldn't do this. It's not like him." Detectives had reached a crossroads. They either needed to charge him or let him go. As the matter of charging him was deferred to the Director of Prosecutions, Boy B was released. After 4 days, officers were given permission to charge him. He was rearrested and charged with the murder of Anna Creasel. He didn't give a reply. On the May 31st, 2018, at Newlands Cross Crematorium, the funeral for Anna Creasel was held. Her family requested that those in attendance wore sparkle and color in memory of Anna. As she was part of a dance troupe, Dance Allez, members wearing silver sequins and red headscarves formed a guard of honor at her funeral. A request was also made that any donations may be given to the Russian-Irish adoption group. A Russian flag and Russian doll were placed over her coffin. On the August 2nd, after more than 2 months in custody, Boy was granted bail in the High Court. Boy B was granted bail on the August 21st after serving just over 4 weeks in custody. While they were no longer in custody, they were heavily supervised and would remain so until their trial began. The age of criminal responsibility in Ireland is 12 years old. This drops to 10 when the case involves rape or murder. Both boys were 13 years old. They were the youngest people in the history of the Republic of Ireland to be charged with murder. For adults, charges of this nature would carry a potential life sentence, but as the accused were both minors, these were not mandatory for children. Mr. Justice Paul McDermott was assigned to hear it. Leading the case on behalf of the states was Brendan Gryan, a criminal barrister with vast experience of high-profile and complex cases. The trial of Boy A and Boy B began on the April 29, 2019, in the Central Criminal Court. The judge and barristers would break with tradition and not wear wigs and gowns. Boy A and Boy B would be allowed to sit next to their parents in the public gallery. In accordance with the Children Act, the general public would not be allowed to witness the trial to ensure that their identities could be protected. Only bona fide journalists would be allowed to attend, but they were asked that numbers be kept down and the court would intervene if necessary. Mr. Justice McDermott denied an application lodged by the lawyers of Boyer to have him tried separately. They argued that the jury was bound to be prejudiced against him after hearing Boy B repeatedly accuse him. And although the interviews of one couldn't be used against the other, they said that the jurors could not help but be influenced by these interviews. In refusing their bid, Mr. Justice McDermott said, "It would be a distortion of the factual background of the entire factual matrix of what happened in the lead-up to the death of Miss Crashall was not set out in full to the jury." He also said he would give jurors strong warnings about not relying on Boy B's interviews when considering the case against Boy A. For Boy B, his defense was far more straightforward. No forensic evidence tied him to the murder, and the majority of the evidence the prosecution had was evidence he had provided during his interviews. The priority of his lawyers was to limit the damage the interviews had caused to his case, especially with the amount of lies he had told and the inconsistencies in his story. In early 2019, Boy B's defense team requested that he be examined by a mental health professional. Dr. Colm Humphreys, an experienced psychologist who specializes in childhood trauma, was brought in. He said that Boy B had been traumatized by witnessing the attack on Anna and subsequently diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder. He said that the boy's PTSD contributed to the lies he had told investigators, and that he had lied to protect himself. Dr. Humphreys said that it was his opinion that Boy B was unaware of what was going to happen to Anna and that he was sexually naive, and he had got into the house in the hopes of watching Boy A and Anna kiss. Although the defense team had planned to call Dr. Humphreys as a witness, this was a risky move. During his sessions with him, Boy B had given information about what he had seen in the abandoned house that he had failed to tell the police. He told the doctor that he had seen Boy as standing over her with his trousers open during the attack. He also said that he had seen Anna gasping before going silent. If the doctor was called to give evidence for the defense, he would be open to cross-examination on these matters, which would have helped the state argue their case, that Boy B had continued to lie to them right up until his final interview. Throughout the entire trial, Geraldine and Patrick were sat in the courtroom. They heard every piece of devastating evidence, but they were determined to see it through to its conclusion. Even when Professor Marie Cassidy spent the 40 minutes listing all the injury sites on Anna's body and described the autopsy process, Geraldine and Patrick were there. Boy A and Boy B were excused for this part of the trial due to the graphic nature of the evidence that was being presented. When her parents were called to give their witness statements, they made sure that everyone in the courtroom knew exactly who Anna was. They talked about her hobbies and her interests. Although the jury would not see a picture of Anna alive, the descriptions her parents gave painted a clear and detailed picture of the kind of child she was. Prosecutor agreed and also made it clear to emphasize how badly she had been bullied and used this to illustrate that she could be very easily taken advantage of. A computer-generated 3D model of Glenwood House was used, and the locations of items, including Anna's clothes and the murder weapons, were shown in the model alongside the photographs. This helped the jury clearly visualize the scene without having to visit. The violent imagery in pornography found on the phone during the search was inadmissible. Because of the 6-month gap between the material being accessed and the murder, Judge McDermott ruled that the admission of any of the pornographic material would be unfair. He made the same ruling about the internet searches made by Boy B for knives and for a YouTube video called "My Girlfriend Tortured, Stabbed, and Starved Me." During the trial, portions of Boy B's interview were played for the court. In it, he called Anna an outcast and said she wore slutty clothes. "I thought of Anna like a weirdo, someone I should not be around." This left her parents visibly upset. Another part of the trial that caused them huge distress was hearing Boy B's description of how Boya had attacked her. Nevertheless, her parents stayed in the court, showing tremendous courage and dignity. The boys were sat in different parts of the court and were never seen interacting with each other. On day 15 of the trial, the court was shown footage of Boy B's interview with the police where he admitted to lying. During this, a note was handed to the lawyers saying that Boy B had become overwhelmed with anxiety and was suffering a panic attack. Court was adjourned for the day and an ambulance was called. He was treated on site and was checked by a GP that evening. He recovered and no reason for the panic attack was given. Boyb's father said his son was very naive and immature and very hungry for friendship. He said that he tended to believe everything his friends were saying. Despite some of the evidence being ruled as inadmissible, the state had built a strong case against Boyer. It was made up of three main elements: the CCTV from the park, the lies he had told including faking an attack, and the forensic evidence that linked him to the scene. For Boy B, they were relying on his numerous lies he had told during his interviews and the amount of times he had changed his story. But there was still no forensic evidence. The state needed to prove that he knew the plan was to kill Anna that day. In order to do this, they referred back to the admission that Boyer had asked him the month earlier if he wanted to kill her. If he believed Boyer was being serious, then he was guilty. If he thought he was joking, he was innocent. The jury would be repeatedly told that being at the scene of a murder is not a crime, nor is failing to intervene to stop a murder. On Wednesday, June 12th, after 7 weeks of evidence, the jury retired to deliberate. They would be in discussion for the next 14 hours and 24 minutes over the following 5 days. 2:02 p.m., June 18, 2019, the jury had reached their verdict. Boy A was found guilty of the murder and aggravated sexual assault of Anastasia Kriegel. Boy B was found guilty of the murder of Anastasia Kriegel. The four women confirmed that the verdicts were unanimous. Sat at the back of the courtroom, Boy B turned to his mother and asked, "I'm guilty." The mother hugged her son while his father became noticeably upset. Geraldine and Patrigue were silent as the verdict was read, again demonstrating the tremendous dignity they had shown throughout the trial. Following the verdict, Mr. Justice Paul McDermott thanked the members of the jury for their service and relieved them of jury duty for the rest of their lives. This has been a very difficult trial. I can't offer you anything apart from, of course, sincere gratitude. The prosecuting counsel said that places were available at the Obestown Children Detention Campus. The judge remanded them in custody and sentencing was adjourned until July 15th. In order to allow psychological assessments to take place on the two teenage boys, sentencing was again adjourned to October. In the days after the verdict, the Kriegel family held a memorial service for Anna in St. Catherine's Park, where those who knew and loved her gathered together to remember her and mark her all too short life. Throughout and after the trial, people were outraged that Anna's life been put on full display and then picked apart, while the boys convicted of her murder had total anonymity. Denise Fergus, the mother of James Bulger, who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by two teenage boys in 1993, expressed her concerns about the decision to not name the killers. In the case of her son, the decision was made to name John Venables and Robert Thompson, which was unprecedented at the time. It is and remains a criminal offense to ever identify either Boy A or Boy B, and they will continue to be known only by these names. On the November 5, 2019, the boys were sentenced. Boyer was sentenced to life in prison with a review period after 12 years of incarceration. He was also given 12 years for aggravated sexual assault, with this running alongside his murder sentence. He was also placed on the sex offenders register. Boy B was sentenced to 15 years for murder, which will be reviewed after 8 years. When passing his sentence, Mr. Justice Paul McDermott said, "The two boys bear responsibility for her murder and must be accountable and accept the consequences of their crimes." He added that this murder was the most serious, disturbing, and shocking type because of the extreme violence that had been used. The judge turned to the boys as he told them, "Both of you will be required to serve lengthy periods of detention, but you will have the opportunity to return to your families, your community, return to society when you are relatively young men. When that will be is not yet determined, but much depends on your behavior and attitude over the coming years. You have the opportunity for a future, a second chance, something you so wrongfully and cruelly denied to Anna Kriegel." Geraldine gave a victim impact statement during the sentencing. She was wild and wonderful, electric, so full of fun, madness, and laughter. We could not believe the happiness and joy we had found in our lives. She was the love of our lives, and every single night before she went to bed, she told us she loved us too. She cannot do that anymore, and we cannot tell you how badly it hurts. She was just a little girl with so many hopes and dreams and so much love inside her that she shared generously with all who knew her. Her dream was to build a hotel called the Anna Love Hotel. She drew detailed floor plans, and we, her parents, would have had a special cottage on the land where we could spend our holidays and be near her. Her plans, our future, shattered. In her victim impact statement, Geraldine noted that Anna was due to meet her two younger sisters the first time this year, but she never got the chance. Geraldine said that when Anna's birth family had found out what had happened to her, they cried and cried. She said, "They will never feel her warm hugs and loving kisses, or see her dance so elegantly, or hear her infectious laughter, and we will never experience that joy again." The boys are currently being held in Oberstown Detention Center in North Dublin. When they turn 18, they will be transferred to an adult prison to continue their sentences. In May 2020, it was reported that Boy A, aged 15 at the time, was assaulted by fellow inmates and had suffered minor injuries as a result. Boy A and Boy B will be offered new identities if they are released. During the sentencing, it emerged that in his psychiatric evaluations, Boy A admitted to causing Anna's death, but denied the sexual assault. Boy B continues to maintain his innocence and rejects the verdict of the jury. Following her murder, her family were determined to turn the horrific into something positive, and so set up a charity in her honor, ANA. It was set up with a Russian-Irish adoption group to help other teenagers. Whilst we may never know the motivations for her murder, we know for sure that Anna was deeply loved and someone who loved deeply in return, and despite all that she had been through, showed an incredible strength. The following words were written by Anna at the start of secondary school when asked what her hopes were for her future. "My hopes for the future. I hoped I would get into secondary school, and I did. That is one goal down. My second hope is to go to Paris University like my dad, the hardest one to get into. And when I come home from Paris, I would like to get a dog. I would like to get married too. Not sure I want any babies. Well, not yet anyway. I hope that I have a good life." Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. On the evening of September 27, 1974, 15-year-old Lori Nesson was among the many students cheering at a high school football game in Columbus, Ohio. After the game, Lori, an honor student from Eastmore High School, attended several parties with her classmates. She was last seen leaving a party at 12:30 a.m. but never returned home. On September 28th, her body was discovered on Rosehill Road in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. She was found naked in a ditch, with her clothes scattered along the road for several miles. Lori's death was not initially classified as a homicide. Instead, the coroner described it as death by asphyxiation from an unknown means. Over the years, her case would be reviewed twice more, once in 1998 and again in 2007 to no avail. With a lack of evidence and a shortage of DNA testing capabilities, the case went cold and remained that way for decades. It wasn't until 2019 that the case was reopened. Reynoldsburg Patrol Officer Craig Bradford solicited the coroner's files and found many inconsistencies that suggested Lori's death had involved foul play. In September of 2020, Officer Bradford presented the evidence to the Franklin County Coroner's Office, and Lori Nesson's death was officially ruled a homicide. Lori's family had suspected foul play from the beginning. "Somebody knows something," said Lori's sister, Toni Hastings, who was 13 at the time of her murder. A 92-pound 15-year-old girl does not lay down on the side of the road naked and die on her own, but that wasn't the end of the road for this case. In December of 2020, a local news station in Ohio shared an article updating Lori's case with the homicide ruling, and then the police got a tip that would change everything. Right after the segment aired, Police Sergeant Jim Coslow received a phone call from a cousin of the late Karen Adams, whose story was sadly very similar to Lori Nesson's. 17-year-old Karen Adams had been murdered 6 months after Lori on March 9, 1975. She had disappeared while walking to a friend's home. The next day, Karen's body was discovered in a ditch in Blacklick, Ohio, less than 4 miles from Reynoldsburg. Like Lori, Karen's murder was unsolved for decades. Sergeant Coslow reached out to the investigator who helped solve Karen's case in 2011 using advanced forensic technology, which identified Karen's killer as Robert Mayer and Charles Weber. By the time Karen's murderers were identified, one of them, Charles Weber, had already died. Robert Mayer, on the other hand, was now 70 years old. He was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison for the murder of Karen Adams and died while incarcerated. Although they couldn't get a DNA swab from Charles Weber, his son offered a cheek swab to provide familial DNA that could confirm Charles was involved in Karen's murder. Detective Chuck Clark from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office told Sergeant Koslow he believed that these were likely the same two men who were responsible for Lori's murder. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was then able to confirm Weber and Mayer were the same men responsible for Lori Nesson's death. Both men had a violent criminal history, including murder, robbery, rape, and kidnapping. In 2021, Lori's family and friends gathered for a memorial to honor her life, which Gene Adams, brother of Karen Adams, also attended. Beforehand, Lori's sister, Toni, visited Lori's grave to tell her of her killer's identification and let her know that justice had been served. "I really hope that this opens the doors for other cases for other families that have no answers," Toni Hastings said in a statement to media. "Nobody should ever have to wait 46 years. It was a day before Thanksgiving weekend, November 26, 1980, in Irvine, California. While many people were preparing for the weekend's festivities, the 42-year-old mother of four, Judith, who went by Judy Nesbitt, was going to the Marina Dunes Yacht Anchorage in Newport Beach. The Nesbitt family had recently bought a home and decided to sell their boat, a 36-foot-long cabin cruiser called the Felicidad IV. According to Judy's son, she received a phone call at 9:30 that morning from a prospective buyer who booked a 1 p.m. appointment to see the yacht. Judy obliged and left to meet the potential buyer, but then hours passed by without a word from her. By 7 p.m., her husband Fred was worried and decided to head down to the marina to check on her. Upon entering the cabin of the boat, he discovered the body of his wife. Scene investigators found signs of a violent struggle, which they suggested culminated in Judy's death. She had been shot once in the head. While the boat had not been ransacked, cash, credit cards, hairs from an unknown person were extracted from the crime scene and kept as evidence. But since this was 1980, DNA testing had yet to come into the picture. Even though the Marina Dunes Yacht Anchorage was identified as private property, there were no security gates or security personnel on site. A fellow boater's cruiser had been stolen several days prior to the murder, but it was soon recovered by harbor police. After talking with local boaters and witnesses, police put together a description of a man who was seen inspecting the boat on the day of the murder. The man was described as 30 to 35, medium weight, and between 5'7" and 5'10". He had brown hair and aviator glasses. According to a Los Angeles Times article, witnesses also saw a man leaving the boat after they heard screams and a gunshot. This information was not immediately reported to police. Newport Beach police worked over the weekend in an effort to solve the case. But aside from the suspect description, they had few clues to go off of, and so the case went cold. In 2002, investigators were able to build out a limited DNA profile based on the roots of the hairs found at the crime scene. The profile was entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, which analogs DNA information gathered and used by law enforcement agencies, but unfortunately, they couldn't find a match within the database. Years passed, and although the police department never gave up on their search for Judy's killer, they had no further leads. Then, in 2018, there was a break in the case. Green Laboratories, an independent testing lab, was able to produce a more detailed DNA profile extracted from the remaining hair shafts found at the crime scene. And on Monday, August 9, 2021, the Newport Beach Police Department announced they finally had identified Judy Nesbitt's killer. Through the use of investigative genetic genealogy, new forensic crime-solving techniques, and the assistance of the genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, the Newport Police Department identified Kenneth Elwin Marks as Judy Nesbitt's killer. The police determined that Marks had been the one to make the 1 p.m. appointment under the guise of being a potential buyer for the yacht. He then followed Judy into the sleeping quarters of the cabin where he accosted her. A violent struggle broke out before he murdered her, stole the cash, credit cards, and checkbooks, and fled the scene. Marks was not considered a suspect during the investigation and is not known to be connected to any other crimes. He passed away from cancer in California in 1999, though officers are still looking to see if he may be connected to other cold cases. This was a landmark case as it included the first DNA extraction of its kind to identify a murderer during a criminal investigation in the United States. In a statement, Newport Beach Police Chief John T. Lewis said Kenneth Marks has passed away, but he no longer gets to hold the secrets of his deeds. Through incredible advances in technology and the tireless dedication of these investigators, we now have some closure for all who knew and loved Judy Nesbitt. On the evening of October 12, 1985, 28-year-old Denise Stafford was home alone with her daughter in Sarasota, Florida. Denise was a new mom and her husband Frank was working a night shift at a local bar called the Playground Lounge. While the exact timeline of the events is unknown, sometime between 11 p.m. that night and 3:10 the next morning, Denise was attacked and strangled to death while standing in her bedroom. Her body was found with her head placed at the foot of the bed, leading investigators to believe that she had been placed there after her murder. Police reviewed the crime scene as well as the Stafford's home and found no evidence of forced entry. This led them to believe that Denise knew her killer and that they had been let into her house, but they weren't able to produce a suspect, leaving the case to go unsolved for 20 years. By 2020, DNA and forensic technologies had advanced rapidly. Investigators remained convinced that Denise had been placed on her bed by her killer and that her clothing would contain traces of the killer's DNA from where they had to have touched her to move her. So in March of 2020, the clothes that Denise was wearing at the time of her murder was sent to be re-examined and they found something. Foreign DNA had been discovered underneath the knees and around the ankles of the pants Denise had been wearing at the time of the murder, confirming the investigators' theory. Then in August of 2021, 35 years after Denise's murder, the Sarasota Police Department announced they had found her killer. The foreign DNA found on her pants belonged to convicted killer Joseph Megaletti. So who was Joseph Megaletti? Megaletti was a co-worker of Denise's husband Frank at the Playground Lounge. Over time, Megaletti had come to know Frank's work schedule and had met Denise and had visited them at their home. Denise had also received seat covers for her car from Megaletti. Wally was considered a person of interest in the case at the time. Along with a few other people, he was never officially developed as a suspect. Megaletti died in prison in 2015 at the age of 64 while serving a life sentence for the 1995 murder of former neighbor Kathleen Leonard. He had been arrested in 1999 and had been convicted in June 2001. Much like Denise's murder, there had been no sign of forced entry at Kathleen's home, and she too had been found lying on her bed. So why did Megaletti kill Denise Stafford? Civilian investigator Jeff Bergwalt said while there's no clear motive, Megaletti was a known drug user and had a record of committing crimes to support his drug use. Maybe the motive was robbery. Maybe he knew the family had something, an item that he could utilize. I don't know the motive that brought him into their house in October of 1985. I just know the results. While no official motive may ever be known, Denise Stafford's case was officially closed thanks to the decades-long work of the Sarasota Police Department and the many advances in forensic technology. Denise's mother, Dora Nipper, described her daughter as a loving person who is missed by the entire family. She says, finding that Mr. Megaletti was the perpetrator and that he's gone, that he's not going to harm anyone else, that has been my healing cry from the beginning. I didn't want to see another mother go through what our family has. Investigator Birdwell issued a warning to criminals who think they've gotten away with their crimes, saying, "It's important for every suspect out there who hasn't been arrested to understand you haven't gotten away with it. We're still coming. You still need to look over your shoulder with some effort on our part and with technology. Your day is coming." In late 2013, 75-year-old Isaiah Kakihi and 67-year-old Jessico Kakihi were at the altar exchanging vows. Both had been married previously. This was Isaiah's second marriage and Jessico's fourth. They had met on a matchmaking website and married shortly thereafter. In an email to Isao, Jessico wrote, "I will stay with you for the rest of my life." But less than 2 months later, on December 28, 2013, Isao died suddenly. He had collapsed in their home in Muku, just outside of Kyoto, Japan. Jessico was reportedly inconsolable when police interviewed her, and they almost closed the case until the autopsy results came in. Autopsies aren't a normal occurrence in the death culture of Japan. They are generally only done at the request of police, and because Japan has such a low rate of crime, they are very rare. However, an officer had interviewed Jessico and discovered that she had been married 4 times, and all of her husbands had died in similar manners. So, the police officer made sure to look deeper into the matter. The post-mortem examination had uncovered a lethal dose of hydroxytic acid, also known as cyanide, in Mr. Kakihi's blood and stomach. Police started to suspect Kakihi's involvement in her husband's death. They soon started to unravel Kasiko's long history of murdered husbands and boyfriends, which spanned decades. Kasiko Yamamoto was born on November 28, 1946, and was raised in Fukuoka, Japan. She had been a bright student and wanted to go to university, but her father wouldn't allow her due to his belief that women didn't need a higher education. She was a bank teller for many years and enjoyed working, but was forced to leave in 1969 when she met and married her first husband. Her new husband owned a successful fabric painting company. The couple had 2 children together, and her husband provided a comfortable life for the family. In 1994, her 54-year-old husband suffered a heart attack and was sent to hospital. He spent a few days there, and after recovering significantly, he was deemed fit to leave and was discharged. Though within days of him returning home, he died. It was thought to have been related to his previous heart condition. After her husband's death, Kasiko took over her husband's company, but under her inexperienced leadership, the company collapsed. Less than a year later, Chasiko lost all of the wealth that her husband had accumulated and declared bankruptcy. In the bankruptcy, she lost the business and her home. An interesting fact about the fabric painting business: cyanide is used as a part of the commercial printing process. This led investigators to believe that this was how Chisago was introduced to the poison and gave her unfettered access. In 2004, she met and married a pharmaceutical wholesaler who she met through a dating agency. 2 years later, he died from a stroke at the age of 69. She then married 75-year-old Toshiaki Yamamoto in 2008, who suffered a heart attack 3 months after their wedding. The couple had been at a restaurant and heading home when he collapsed in the street. He was rushed to hospital and was put on life support before his death. Again, it was ruled as a natural cause due to his age. At the time, the deaths of her husband weren't deemed suspicious, so all of their bodies were cremated. But after Isao's murder, the police took a look back at the pattern that had emerged and started investigating Kasiko further. During their investigation, law enforcement discovered that she had likely attempted to kill her fiancé, Toshiaki Suhiro, with cyanide back in 2007. He survived the attempted murder because he only drank a small amount of the poison, though he died 2 years later of cancer. Police found traces of cyanide in a stool sample that had been kept by the hospital. In 2012, a man that Chasiko was in a relationship with, Masanori Honda, who was 71, died while riding his mini bike. His death was thought to be caused by an arrhythmia or abnormal heart rate, but otherwise heart-related as well. In 2013, she became involved with retired architect Minoru Hayoki, who was 75. He got sick after they had dinner together and died soon after. At the time, his cause of death was listed as lung cancer. Soon after Minoru's death, she married Isao Kakihi. He was a retired salaryman and had been covered by life insurance at the time of his death. The couple had been set up using a matchmaking service. Law enforcement learned that Kasiko used 10 different matchmaking agencies, and her profile had very specific requirements for her future partners: elderly, without children, wealthy, and owned his own home. Law enforcement determined that she had a pattern. When she found a new boyfriend or husband, she would change her last name to theirs and immediately open multiple bank accounts. It was reported that she had pocketed at least 1 billion euros, roughly 9,100,000 euros in American, in insurance and inheritance payouts. However, she lost much of it due to failed investments and bad financial trading. Chizeko was arrested in November 2014, 11 months after Isao's murder. She was charged with the murder of Isao Kakihi, the murder of 2 of her boyfriends, the attempted murder of Toshiku Tsuhiro. She wasn't charged in connection with the deaths of her previous 3 husbands, as too much time had passed and there was little evidence. Upon her arrest, law enforcement were able to search her home. Police suspected Kasiko would kill the men with capsules or drinks laced with cyanide. After searching both of her homes in Osaka and Muko, they confiscated possible evidence including medical books, pills, capsules, and wafers used to wrap a powdered medicine. They also found traces of cyanide in a plant pot that she had attempted to dispose of. Her trial began in 2017, and she was 70 when it started, and the trial drew a lot of media attention. Kasiko was quickly dubbed the Black Widow or the Poison Lady by Japanese media. According to investigators, she was romantically involved to approximately 10 men over the years and had likely been involved in the deaths of 8 of them. During the time between Isaiah's death and her arrest, she had started seeing 2 new men. One, a man in his 80s, took to the stand as a witness in her trial. He had met Kasiko on a matchmaking website and was immediately taken by her charm. And after their 4th meeting, he gave her his house key. He said he'd been lonely after his wife had died and wanted to live with Chisako, but he'd broken up with her after receiving a warning about her from the police. Chisako initially stated that she would remain silent during her defense questioning, so her lawyers pleaded not guilty on her behalf. But then she stunned the courts by admitting to the murder of Isaiah, saying, "I killed my husband. I was waiting for the right timing as I wanted to kill him out of deep hatred." She also told the court, "I had no intention of hiding the guilt. I will laugh it off and die if I am sentenced to death tomorrow." She later attempted to retract her statement, saying she had no recollection of it. Her lawyer said that Kasiko was suffering from dementia and that her statements could not be considered credible. Kasiko was found guilty on 3 murder charges and on 1 count of attempted murder and was sentenced to hang by the Kyoto District Courts. Her lawyer appealed the sentence, calling it unjust, as she had early-stage dementia, and the prosecution failed to prove how she had obtained and stored the cyanide. The court acknowledged she had developed dementia sometime around 2015, but was determined that she was competent to stand trial, as the disease was progressing slowly and her symptoms weren't serious. The judge rejected her lawyer's claims that she couldn't be held responsible for her crimes due to her dementia, stating that her crimes were premeditated and she properly understood the situation. After her arrest, Japan's criminal justice system was scrutinized for not investigating several of her previous partner's deaths as suspicious. Autopsies weren't performed for many of the victims when they had died, but if they had, the police could have stopped Kasiko from killing more men, and in June of 2021, the Supreme Court of Japan upheld Kasiko's death sentence ruling. The judge stated she used a matchmaking agency to get acquainted with elderly victims, one after another, and poison them after making them trust her. It is a ruthless crime based on planned and strong murderous intention. The judge also stated that even taking into consideration her age, the death penalty was unavoidable. The date of her death sentence has not been released, as in Japan, inmates on death row do not know their sentence is being carried out until hours before it happens. Pamela Millam was a 19-year-old student at Indiana State University, pursuing her goal of becoming an English teacher, inspired by her educators. On September 15, 1972, during ISU's Rush Week, Pamela was a member of the Sigma Kappa sorority. She mentioned to some friends that she needed to move her car and then left the Homestead Hall. Pamela said she would be back in a few minutes but never returned. Pamela didn't live on campus, and she commuted to school daily from her childhood home. She shared with her younger sister and parents. No one at the sorority party thought anything was suspicious when Pamela didn't return. They had assumed she had gone home. The next morning, Pamela didn't show up for work, and this concerned her family. It was very unlike Pam to be so irresponsible. On September 16th, 2 of Pam's friends spotted her 1964 Pontiac Lumans in a parking lot about a block away from where it had been the previous day. They could see Pam's glasses in the vehicle. The girls called Pam's house, and her father and sister, Sheila, decided to bring a spare set of keys to check out the car. When her father popped the trunk, what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Pamela had been stuffed inside the trunk of her vehicle. Her hands were tied behind her back and she had been gagged, and there was tape over her mouth. She had rope around her neck, which was the same product used to bind her hands. The thin white rope appeared to be clothing line. She had leaves and dirt on her body and caught in the layers of her pantyhose and pants. There were no witnesses, but the police did a thorough investigation. The lead investigator insisted on the collection of soil and trace evidence that at the time there had been no way of testing, but he believed that science would one day catch up and it may be useful. DNA was collected from Pam's blouse with no witnesses or enemies. The case went cold. Authorities believed that a man who had been arrested 7 weeks after Pamela's murder had been responsible. He had been arrested in connection to several assaults on campus. However, police were never able to link Robert Austin to Pamela. No one knew at the time that all that evidence that had been collected from the initial crime scene would come to light, but at the time it would be tucked away in the back of a storage room waiting. In 2000, newly appointed Terre Haute Police Chief Sean Keane handed out cold cases to each of his detectives. Keane felt it was unfair that he didn't have a case, so he assigned himself the unsolved murder of Pamela Millam. Keane said that as soon as he opened the file, he couldn't put it down. He brought it home and irritated his wife by spreading the crime scene photos in their living room. He tested the DNA found at the scene and tested against the lead suspect, Robert Wayne Austin, but was quickly able to eliminate him. It wasn't a match. He worked the case for 11 years, manually removing 100 of suspects. Pamela's parents mourned differently. They passed before any breaks in the case were ever discovered. In 2018, Keane made a decision that would either make or keep the case cold forever. He had sent the last usable sample of DNA to Parbon Nanolabs, the Virginia-based lab that was known for using DNA from companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com to reverse engineer family trees. This company was most notable in identifying the Golden State Killer, John D. Miller, who murdered April Marie Tinsley and William Talbot, who was arrested in connection to the murders of Jay Cook and Tanya Von Kullenberg. Parbon was able to connect the DNA to a distant female cousin. They mapped out additional family members and could begin narrowing a suspect down from the family tree. Based on the results, Keane conducted interviews and narrowed it down to a single suspect, Jeffrey Hand. Keane was disappointed to learn that Hand had already died, but used reverse paternity DNA tests to confirm that Hand had killed Pamela. Jeffrey Hand had been 23 at the time of Pamela's murder. Hand didn't live in Terre Haute, but he had lived there some years past. In 1972, Hand had been working for a Chicago-based record company, delivering records to stores throughout Illinois and Indiana. He was around the age of university goers. He was familiar with the area, which may have contributed to how he navigated the campus unnoticed. He was young, had light hair, soft boyish features. He didn't look dangerous. Less than a year after Pam's death, Hand had picked up 2 hitchhikers, Jeffrey Thomas and his new wife. The couple were hitchhiking back after visiting friends in Chicago. Hand had picked them up just south of Terre Haute, and on the drive, he told the couple he needed to stop at his sister's house to see about getting some money. Hand pulled over, drawing a pistol, and he demanded money from the couple. The couple showed them they didn't have any money, which, may have explained why they had been hitchhiking. Hand forced them into a grain bin and told them he was holding them for ransom. After waiting for a bit, Han took Thomas out of his wife's sight. They were gone for a while, and while they'd been gone, she was able to escape the bin and run to a nearby home for help. When police arrived, they were able to arrest Hand quickly. Hand also led them to Thomas's lifeless body, which had been discarded in a weedy area. Thomas's autopsy revealed he'd been killed by a gunshot wound to the head, but had also been stabbed in the chest 8 times and had his throat slit. His hands had also been tied behind his back, much like Pam's had been. Hand never served time for the slaying of Jeffrey Thomas. At his trial, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity for both the murder and the kidnapping charges. He was, however, committed to a state reformatory for 2 years. Han's last encounter with the law was in January 1978. In a mall parking lot, an off-duty deputy was in the right place at the right time. He witnessed a man attempting to abduct a woman. He yelled out, at which point Han ran. The deputy called for backup and pursued. Hand shot at the officer, injuring him. The fire was returned, and Hand was fatally shot as he ran away. Hand died as time of his death. Pamela's family was relieved to hear that Hand had not lived a full life. However, it was bittersweet knowing that he would never face justice for the years he stole from them. They were grateful that he had been stopped before more young women could have been harmed. I hope his life of crime was a short one, although given that he had already established a pattern and preference, there may be more discoveries linking him to more crimes in the future. This case takes us to the large market town of Solihull in the West Midlands, England, with a population of around 125,000. Among its residents was 22-year-old Renee O'Day, who had fled the war zone in Syria and moved to England with her 2-year-old son to join her mother, Kaula, and stepfather, Mohammed, who had been living in Solihull for 16 years. Described as intelligent and independent, Renee quickly became a well-known figure in her community, actively involved in various charitable activities. Her Aunt Nora noted that she had a beautiful singing voice and harbored dreams of releasing her own music someday. Upon arriving in the UK, she promptly enrolled in college. And between that and raising her baby boy, there was never a dull day for Ranham. Her aunt recalled how excited she was to be attending college. It was a fresh start for her and her son, and she couldn't wait for what was to come. While studying at Solihull College, she met Janbaz Taryn. He too had recently moved to the UK, but had actually lied about his age in order to move over. He was permitted entry into the country as a minor fleeing a war zone, declaring his age to be under 18. He was actually 21 years old. He enrolled at the same college, and as soon as he met Raneem, he quickly began pressuring her to date him. Initially resistant, Raneem eventually agreed, and the pair began a relationship in 2016. He would tell her, "When I saw you, I said, this is mine." Despite the relationship being turbulent from the get-go, the pair married less than a year later in an Islamic ceremony. The marriage was not recognized by UK law, and Ranham's family said they begrudgingly gave their blessing. Ranham's aunt said that her niece later revealed the terrifying threats that had made her agree to marry him. Janbaz told her that if she didn't marry him, he would finish her family as well as Raneem. After the wedding, Raneem confided in her family that she realized she had made a big mistake, but didn't know how to get out of it. Already a possessive and controlling person, Janbaz was now becoming violent, and he quickly began appearing on the police's radar too. Raneem, once so close to her family, was seeing less and less of them, and the visits people made to her flats were now few and far between. Janbaz was telling anyone that would listen that Ranhan was causing the issues and was mentally unstable. Even with everything going from bad to worse, Ranhan continued studying at college, working hard and making sure her biggest priority, her son, was getting through nursery. Soon, Janbaz would be removed from the college when Ranhan told teachers about his real age. Ranhan was faced with a huge shock when she learned of his very secret life back in Afghanistan. It turned out that Janbaz had another wife who was pregnant, and they already shared 3 children. In 2017, after a long time building herself up to do it, Raneem ended the relationship. Janbaz had been openly bragging about his second life with his friends, laughing at the fact that neither wife knew what was going on. Infuriated that Ranhan had left him, Janbaz's harassment was now totally relentless and out of control. Ranhan had moved in with her mom, and Janbaz took to sleeping outside her address for 12 consecutive nights, with the neighbors often chasing him away from the street. Ranhan told people that she felt her days were now numbered. Her family rallied around her and held a meeting with Janbaz in which he agreed to stay away from Raneem. This had no impact, however. Although the police were frequently called to intervene and Ranhan would tell them that she felt like she was in danger, she often declined to take it any further than that. A year would pass, and things would only get more dangerous for Raneem. In early August 2018, with the help of her mother, Raneem obtained a non-molestation order against him after Janbaz broke into Kaula's home and smashed Raneem's phone up. Her aunt said that Raneem had finally found her strength and told the solicitor everything from start to finish. The court injunction was filed on August 16, 2018. This prevented Janbaz from coming within 100 meters of her. Ranhan finally felt like her life was back under her control. Her hard work had paid off, and she gained good results from college as well as her certificates, and was excited to start looking for jobs. Ranhan and Kaula spent the day visiting family, shopping, and ending up in a shisha lounge in the evening. Little did they know, Janbaz had been following them all day in a van he had borrowed from his workplace. After hiding and watching them for a while, he walked up to the pair and an argument broke out. He snatched Raneem's phone from her and hit Kaula before she hit him back. The fight continued for a while with people looking on. Jambaz was eventually escorted out of the restaurant and set off in his van. He then drove to his father's supermarket and grabbed a 12-inch steak knife. After the fight at the shisha bar, Ranam called 999. She told police that despite the court order against him, Jambaz had followed her there and assaulted her and her mother. This court order, unfortunately, could not be found on the police's system. Ranib said that she felt her and her mother were unsafe and that they needed help. Where should they go and what should they do? After this, Roni and Carla were also asked to leave the restaurant as well, and they waited outside on the police to arrive. Half an hour later, she phoned the police again to say she had left the shisha lounge, and she and her mother were now on the way home. Ranam asked the police whether they were going to take any action and was told that they would need to see her first. While they were driving home, Jambaz returned to the shisha lounge armed with the knife and, after realizing the pair had left, set off in his van looking for them. At 11:42, she made a third call asking where the officers were and that she was waiting outside of her house on North Down Road. Another call would go through. Police advised Ranan to go to her mother's house, lock the doors, and call if Jambaz turned up there. In a final call just after midnight, police phoned Raneem to say that the officers couldn't get out that night and they would see her at 8 a.m. She expressed concern that the matter was going to be left until far too late, begging them to see her. In that moment, while the phone call was still connected, Kawala started screaming as she noticed Jambaz coming out of the bushes towards them. Raneem says repeatedly, "He's here. I can see him." Jambaz launched at Raneem and began stabbing her in a frenzied attack. Kauder jumped in to try and protect her daughter, but Jambaz turned the knife on her as well. Raneem's half-sister and stepfather Muhammad came running out after hearing the screams, only to see the women lying on the ground and Jambaz running away. In the next few minutes, authorities poured onto the streets. There was nothing that could be done, and both Ranam and Cowler were pronounced dead at the scene. The head of the West Midlands Police CID described the scene as one of the most brutal and heartrending he had seen in 150 homicides in all his years on the job. Neighbors were now coming out of their homes reporting to have been woken up by the noise, with some saying they saw a man driving away in a white van. Jambaz had discarded his bloodied clothes and knife before changing into a red jacket and shaving off his beard. Just a short while after attacking Raneem and Kaula, he was captured on CCTV in a takeaway called Pepe's on Bearwood High Street, calmly ordering some food. The only suspect police had was Jambaz Theron, and a huge manhunt was now underway to find him. Police were using everything at their disposal to try and track him down, including a £5,000 reward, and they dramatically increased their presence around certain areas to, in their words, provide community reassurance. Jambaz's van was soon located, and forensic analysis quickly began on it. Police searched several addresses linked to Jambaz seizing computer equipment and mobile phones, but he was still nowhere to be found. He would be on the run for 4 days and was now one of Britain's most wanted criminals. Soon, a member of the public saw him and tipped off the police. Officers detained him in an alleyway using pepper spray, and finally, they had Jambaz in handcuffs. The amount of phone calls Raneem had made to the police that night was concerning to the public, and people wanted answers as to why no one came out. The police said they had done their absolute best. On the September 8, 2018, Raneem and Kaula were laid to rest in a joint service attended by 100. Following brief submissions by prosecutors Annabelle Darlow QC and Jody Anderson, Judge Paul Farah QC told Jambaz, "You will be back here before the court on October 30th for a plea and trial preparation hearing. Your trial has been fixed for March 4th next year." But in December 2018, Jambaz appeared at Birmingham Crown Court. He pleaded guilty to both murders. The judge described the murders as significantly premeditated and sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years that he must serve before he can even be considered for parole. The Independent Office on Police Conduct started an investigation into the actions of the West Midlands Police on that night, after the police referred themselves to them. Muhammad Salim said his wife was a wonderful woman, who worked hard to make the home a welcoming, happy place filled with love and good memories. Renee Maudet came to England looking for a better life for her and her baby boy. She was met with an awful end after fighting for her freedom and life for so long. Nora said of her niece, "Just by looking at her, people forget their bad day. She was always smiling, full of life and socializing." Noor now cares for her son and talks to him about Renee all the time. She is determined to not let her niece and sister's death be in vain and works hard to raise awareness for domestic violence and abusive and coercive relationships. Tara Calico's story is one you're likely familiar with in some form. Her disappearance sparked significant media attention and speculation, becoming a cautionary tale for young women everywhere. Now missing for 33 years, her cold case continues to trouble law enforcement. Evidence suggests that her disappearance is shrouded in many secrets, with more than one person likely knowing what happened to Tara. Tara Lee Calico was born on February 28, 1969, in New Mexico to parents David and Patty Calico. With 5 siblings, her parents separated when she was young. Her mother remarried, and Tara moved with Patty and her new husband, John Dole, to Belen, a nearby New Mexico suburb where the family settled. Tara was known for being organized, fiercely independent, and outgoing. As a high-energy, athletic child, she grew into an extremely outdoorsy and adventurous adult, always eager for a hike or a bike ride. She had excelled in high school and always had an easy time making friends. After high school, Tara enrolled at the University of New Mexico and decided to study psychology, where in her first year she maintained a 3.9 GPA. She had always been fascinated with psychology and loved learning about people. Tara had been dating a former high school classmate, Jack Cole, and the two had a relaxed and enjoyable relationship filled with adventures. Jack kept up with Tara's active lifestyle and the two got along well. Between school, her friends, exercise, and her job, Tara had always made sure she had a good balance and was able to keep up on all the things she needed in life. In the early morning hours on September 20th, 1988, the 19-year-old got her things ready for the day. Tara was only a few weeks into her second year at UNM and was getting ready for her daily bike ride. Tara still lived at home, and she often did a 36-mile bike ride along Highway 47 to the terrain tracks and back with her mother. However, Patty didn't go with Tara on this morning. Tara left her home at 9:30 a.m. and set out. Tara had been riding her mother's bike, a neon pink Huffy mountain bike, as her own bike had gotten a flat tire a few days previous. Tara had asked Patty to come get her in the car if she wasn't home by noon, as she had a tennis date with her boyfriend Jack, and then she had to go to class at 3:30 Tara Road with a Walkman playing with headphones. Before she left, she had asked her mom to rewind 2 tapes for her. One was a band called Boston. Side note, who remembers the tediousness of rewinding cassettes so you could listen to them again, or fast-forwarding through songs and an album to get to the good ones, or even worse, your Walkman shredding your favorite tape? Patty waited when Tara didn't return. She set out to go grab her as she and Tara had already planned. The route they biked was pretty much a straight shot, and Patty grew increasingly concerned when she got to the train tracks and didn't see any sign of Tara. Patty called around to local hospitals to see if maybe she'd had an accident and had possibly been admitted. When it was determined that Tara was at the hospital, Patty rounded up a few family friends to help her search for the missing woman. When the group could find no trace of Tara, Patty called the police. A police search began, but nothing was found that day. The search was halted for the night and resumed in the morning, but during the break, a heavy rain came through and may have washed away critical evidence. The search resumed at daylight, and police noticed a set of tire tracks that appeared to look like a bike had veered off the road suddenly about 100 yards off the highway. Witnesses said they saw Tara riding northbound on the highway towards her home at around 11:30. The day she went missing, only 2 miles away from home. Another witness said that she saw a 1953 Ford pickup truck that was dirty white or light gray in color with a white homemade shell in the back, following closely behind her driving on the shoulder. They noted that they could see Tara had headphones on and seemed oblivious to the truck behind her. A third witness said that they had driven past Tara remembering seeing her biking, and they also saw a white truck, and they were able to see that the truck held multiple occupants in the vehicle. Officers searched the area around the bike tire tracks and noted that they saw several footprints in the soft earth. Officers followed the footprints and made a discovery: Tara's tape from her Walkman and broken pieces of plastic that had likely come from her Walkman, along with several empty beer cans. They found the rest of Tara's Walkman at the John F. Kennedy campground, 19 miles away from the highway. The campground sits at the base of the Manzano Mountains, a remote and unpopulated area. With this new evidence, it was clear this wasn't an accident, and it was looking more and more that Tara had been abducted. After the discovery of the tape and pieces of Tara's Walkman, police efforts doubled. But Patty claimed that the efforts of local law enforcement were mixed. She said that one particular officer would call her often with new gruesome possible angles, including being a sacrifice as part of a satanic cult ritual, according to Patty. This was both widely inappropriate and traumatizing for the mother. That same officer also told a reporter that Tara was likely a runaway. Shortly after making the statement, the detective in question was terminated, and Belen PD office called the behavior uncalled and was not part of their protocol. Officers collected a bunch of evidence found on the side of the highway, which included a water bottle, a patch of disturbed dirt, and investigated 3 men that had been seen drinking beer on the back of a pickup truck near the campground and were able to eliminate all of them from the case. The disappearance shocked the area. How did a woman go missing in broad daylight with several witnesses having seen her, and no one was able to find such a unique vehicle that also contained multiple people? Based on witnesses' testimony, detectives released 2 police sketches of the man in the white truck. The driver was described as older, in his late 30s to mid-40s, Caucasian with red hair, and someone also stated that they saw him with a lot of wrinkles around his temple. The witnesses said that the other man was described as younger, Caucasian, and male. They couldn't really see him because he was shielded from view despite an extensive search on land and by helicopter. The search ended on September 27th. Detectives continued the investigation, but without any further leads, the case eventually went cold. Over a year later, on June 15, 1989, 1,700 miles away in Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman found a Polaroid picture in an empty parking space in a parking lot at a convenience store. The photograph showed an unidentified boy and girl bound, with black tape over their mouths in the back of a van. Prior to the woman finding the picture, witnesses said that a white Toyota van had been parked there for some time. The woman called local law enforcement, who passed the photo off to the FBI. The FBI decided to put the photograph in the media in the area, and relative of Patty called her, saying the young woman in the Polaroid looked like Tara. Patty flew down to Florida to look at the picture in person and concluded that the woman bore a striking resemblance to her daughter. What solidified her belief was a scar on the woman's leg. Tara had gotten into a car accident as a child and had a scar on her leg where there was also a mark on the young woman's leg in the picture. Also visible in the photo was a copy of My Sweet Adriana by V.C. Andrews, which was one of Tara's favorite books and author. The photograph was examined by multiple agencies, but none of them definitively concluded the woman was Tara. There was a partial phone number seen on the spine of the novel, but some of the numbers were unreadable, and it didn't lead to any leads. The Los Alamos National Laboratory didn't believe it was her, where Yard determined it was her. After this, Patty lost hope in the FBI and law enforcement in general. Patty expressed disappointment and lack of trust with various law enforcement agencies responsible for investigating Tara's disappearance. Patty passed in 2006, never knowing what happened to her daughter. 2 more photos were found and examined, but it was determined that they likely also weren't connected to Tara. The first photo was found in Montecito, California, at a construction site. It was a blurry photo of a woman's face with a taped mouth and a similar hairline to Tara, according to Patty. The woman had a cowlick at the right temple and also had a lazy pupil in one eye like Tara. There was also a light blue striped fabric behind the woman similar to the fabric of the pillow seen in the van from the first photo. Patty believed it was Tara. However, the Polaroid film it was taken on was not available until 1989. The second photo was a woman on an Amtrak train with a man sitting next to her, with more gauze wrapped around her mouth and wearing black framed glasses. This Polaroid film was not available until February 1990. Patty is not sure if this one could be Tara, but the man's face is included with the suspect's composites. Even decades later, none of the women or the boy from the photo have been identified. The alleged cover-up. A Freedom of Information request was put in for the police records pertaining to Tara Calico at the Valencia Sheriff's Department office. When they received the documents, they were in a state of chaos. Files were disorganized, not cataloged properly. Some files seemed to be missing documents, and witness audio recordings that were logged were no longer in there. On September 20th, 2008, an article published by the Valencia County News Bulletin stated that the sheriff of Valencia County, Rene Rivera, knew what happened to Tara. including the identity of the people who committed the kidnapping. The article alleged that Rivera had received information and that the teens had panicked and murdered Tara, and their parents helped cover it up. Rivera has never released any evidence to support this claim, and he has stated that until a body is found, he cannot make an arrest. In October 2013, a 6-person task force was put together to re-examine the case, but no new evidence was uncovered during that investigation. In 2019, the FBI announced a $20,000 reward for precise details that would lead to the recovery of Tara or her remains. Several witnesses believe that the red-headed man they saw in the old white truck was not an older man, but bore a striking resemblance to local man Lawrence Romero Jr. His father, Romero Sr., had been the sheriff responsible for the investigation into the disappearance of Tara Calico. One of the witnesses had said that she had been flipping through a newspaper and saw an obituary announcement and had recognized the man in the photo. She said that the exact photo that had been used for the obituary was the same photo that she had picked out of the photo lineup as the closest match. According to local sources, the sheriff's department was known to be corrupt, and it is believed that Tara's death was one of many cover-ups. One source alleged that they were friends with Lawrence Jr., Scott Cunningham, and Charlie Hooton. He said that the group were heavy users of drugs and alcohol, and described the group as pretty wild and were known to get into trouble. He also said that he had walked in on the men discussing what to do about Tara's body. Lawrence Romero Sr. died in 2011, and his son had died a few years previous to him. In 2013, a man called into the sheriff's department wanting to make a deathbed confession. Henry Brown was sick, and he knew he didn't have much time left on this earth and wanted to get something off of his chest. He had said that he went to the trailer home of Lawrence Romero Jr. and said that they had dug a makeshift basement underneath the trailer, which was used to smoke pot and drink in. He said that shortly after Tara's disappearance, he went into the basement and saw the body of a young woman wrapped in a blue tarp. He said that Romero, along with 2 other men, had discussed plans of burying her in that basement. He went on to say that Romero told him that they had been waiting for Tara, and Romero had laughed and said that the men had been harassing her from their truck. They said that they purposely hit her off her bike and grabbed her, and the bike before taking her out to the woods. He said that the men sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her. Initially, they had left her body near where she had been murdered, but when the investigation got bigger, they went back and took her body back to Romero Jr.'s trailer. They said that they dumped the bike, and no one ever spoke of it again. Sheriff Deputy Frank Methola took the statement, but it is not among the other documents in the file. Another man, Donald Dutch, came forward with an eerily similar story, but again no records of the confession or subsequent investigation are available. Though these are suspicious claims, it is important to remember that this didn't come from official documentation. These are alleged statements that the authorities do not find credible, though it does call into question some of the odd tactics used by local law enforcement. The harassment that Patty described from a particular officer, as well as the state that the police files had been in addition to the missing records. The FBI made a statement in 2019 saying, Tara had her entire future ahead of her when she vanished. Law enforcement has never given up the search for this young lady, checking out numerous tips and conducting countless interviews over the course of more than 30 years. But it's time for someone to come forward and help us bring Tara home. Michelle Dole continues to keep her sister's cold case in the media, continuing to give interviews, check back in with law enforcement, and stay updated on any new leads. If anyone knows anything about Tara's disappearance, they are encouraged to contact any local FBI office. This is a story I heard frequently while growing up, especially concerning the subsequent court proceedings. A lingering question remains: why? This case shocked the community and sparked discussions about racism, bullying, and violence among teens. The inexplicable violence involved continues to be deeply unsettling. Rena Burke was born in Saanich, British Columbia, Canada, on March 10, 1983. Her mother Zuman was from an Indo-Canadian family, and her father Manjeet was an Indian immigrant. The family were Jehovah's Witnesses, and with their combination of cultures and beliefs, they were often described as a minority within a minority. Rena was the oldest of 3 children and was raised in a quiet middle-class suburb of View Royal, which at the time was a predominantly white upper-class neighborhood. Growing up, Rena sought acceptance from her peers, but was bullied for her appearance and race. In middle school, she started to act out and pick fights at home. Her parents learned that she had been bullied since she started school and suspected that she was slipping depression because of all of the hate she had been receiving. In May of 1994, the family moved and Rena transferred to Burnside Elementary School. Her parents hoped that this would put an end to the bullying, and at first it seemed like it was working. Rena was becoming more social and met a new friend, which she was very excited about. But when that new friend suddenly shunned Rena, she became distraught, and the bullying continued. In '96, Rena graduated elementary school and started attending the Culquettes Middle School. There, she met a new group of friends who she viewed as the cool kids. They stayed out past their curfews, they drank and smoked. To Rena, they had the freedom that she desperately craved, freedom from her parents and their religious rules. Rena felt accepted by her new friend group, but her parents disapproved of them, and Rena started acting out even more. During this time, her father, Manjit, recalls reciting scripture to Rena, which said bad associations spoil useful habits in 1996. When Rena was 13, one of her friends told her that if she really wanted to get out of her house, it was easy. She could get into foster care by telling the police she was being abused. So, she reported her parents for physical abuse, though no charges were laid due to lack of evidence. Even still, she was removed from her family home for a few months and lived with her grandparents, who believed her story. She then claimed she'd been sexually abused by her father, which devastated him. In '97, her father, Manjit, was arrested for sexual abuse against Rena and was put into jail while he awaited arraignment. Eventually, Manjit's charges were cleared when Rena admitted to police she had been lying about the abuse. In his book, her father says, "I now believe Rena manipulated social workers and family alike. It was killing me that no one believed us and everyone seemed to accept Rena's stories." Then, Rena began saying she was uncomfortable in her grandparents' home and was sent to the foster home she wanted to go to. There she met more new friends and began acting more like them, constantly smoking, talking about gangs, and even claiming she was in one. But eventually she realized living in a foster home wasn't as great as she imagined. She still had chores and a curfew and still needed to be accountable to adults. And so she apologized to her parents, and she was able to return home. After a while, though, she wanted to get out of her parents' house and left to stay in a youth shelter before she, yet again, was placed in the government's care. This tumultuous relationship with her parents, social workers, and government officials seems to be that of a confused teen wanting to fit in and make friends. Her strict religious upbringing, overprotective parents were considered uncool, and she seemed to be willing to do anything to get the approval of her peers. Middle school was the most confusing and emotionally draining years of my life. I can't imagine having to deal with that on top of dealing with such heavy issues that Rena was experiencing. On Friday, November 14th, 1997, Rena was staying at her parents' house for an overnight visit. Her friends invited her to a party behind a center school, but when it was broken up by the police, they relocated to the nearby Craig Flower Bridge. She called her parents at 10:40 p.m., 20 minutes before her 11 p.m. curfew, and told them that she was on her way home. It was the last time Rena's parents heard her voice. At the Craig Flower Bridge, a group of teenagers were drinking and smoking marijuana. Then suddenly several of the girls present, now known as the Shoreline Six, swarmed Rena and began beating her, and even put a cigarette out on her forehead. The beating only ended when one of the girls told others to stop. According to other witnesses, the attack seemed to be unprovoked. Rena escaped the beating and was trying to get away when two of the other teenagers present, Kelly Ellard, 15, and Wari Glosky, 16, followed her. Ellard and Glosky dragged her to the other side of the Craig Flower Bridge and beat her a second time before holding her head underwater until she died. They then took her sweater and shoes and rolled her into the water. Rena's curfew had come and gone, and her parents started to worry. They thought she might have gone to her grandparents' house for the night, but she wasn't there, and she wasn't at the group home either. So they called Rena's friends, who said Rena was still at the party when she left around 11 p.m. The next day, Rena's parents called the Stanage police, who refused to classify her as a missing person and instead considered her a runaway due to her past behavior. By Monday, rumors were circulating in the local high school about the beating and about a body floating in the nearby gorge waterway. Though these rumors were heard by students and teachers alike, no one told police until November 21st. The Shoreline Six had made a pact to not rat each other out, but an eyewitness made a statement to the police saying she'd seen Ellard and Glowacki follow Rena after the beating. A full week after she'd been reported missing, despite numerous witnesses, including adult teachers, hearing what had happened the previous weekend, it is unclear why none of these teachers reported what they had heard to police. It instead fell on the student to come forward as a witness for police to get involved. On November 21st, 1997, Glowacki and Ellard were arrested and charged with murder and aggravated assault. The remaining Shoreline Six girls faced aggravated assault charges as well, though their identities are still protected by Canada's Young Offenders Act. On November 22nd, police flew a helicopter over the Craigflower Bridge area, but they saw nothing until they conducted a ground search, where they found a body in the weeds. The body was positively identified as missing teen Rena Verk. The coroner determined Rena's death was caused by drowning, that her internal injuries were compared to someone who had been in a severe car accident. He later testified that even if she hadn't drowned, she probably wouldn't have survived her brain injuries. In February of 1998, 3 of the Shoreline they faced varying sentences. From a 60-day conditional sentence, they faced varying sentences from a 60-day conditional sentence to 1 year in jail. In April 1999, Glowacki's trial began. By June, he was convicted of second-degree murder and given a life sentence. Since he was a minor at the time of the murder, he was eligible for parole after serving 7 years in prison. During his time in prison, he discovered he was Métis, a recognized First Nation class of people in Canada. Because of this, he was able to incorporate tribe elders into his parole processes, which included several restorative justice acts that involved him meeting with Rena's family. In July 2006, he received unescorted temporary absences from jail and was released on full parole in June 2010. The Verk family didn't contest the parole request, as they felt he was remorseful for his actions. Kelly Ellard, now known as Carrie Marie Sims, was 15 years old at the time of Rena's murder. Her lawyer requested to have her case tried in youth court, which was denied by the Supreme Court of Canada due to the level of violence involved in the crime and a seeming lack of remorse. She was first convicted of second-degree murder in March 2000, but it was overturned in February 2003, when the court ruled she wasn't given a fair trial. Ellard was then freed on bail pending her appeal after serving 18 months of her life sentence. 1 month later, she was charged with assault causing bodily harm after beating a 58-year-old woman in a Vancouver park. Her bail was revoked, and she was back in prison by March 2004. In June 2004, a new trial for Ellard began. Witnesses came forward claiming Ellard bragged about killing Rena. Glowacki claimed he watched Ellard drown Rena, though Ellard's lawyer accused Glowacki of lying multiple times during his initial statements to police and during the trial. During her trial, Ellard admitted to punching Rena because she thought she was going to hurt her friends, but denies murdering her. She claimed Glowacki and 2 other girls killed her. She reported as saying, "I'm obviously going to be convicted. You've got what you want. My life is ruined." She showed no remorse for her actions, nor did she ever admit why she orchestrated the attack. The jury was out for 5 days, and in July 2004, a judge declared a mistrial due to jury deadlock. In February of 2005, a new trial for Ellard began, and the star witness was Glowacki. Again, he testified to beating Rena with Ellard and leaving her dead in the water. On April 12, 2005, Ellard was convicted of second-degree murder for a second time. She was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 7 years. But that still wasn't the end of it. In September of 2008, the BC Court of Appeal overturned Ellard's second-degree murder conviction and ordered a 4th trial on the grounds that the judge from the 3rd trial gave the jury the wrong instructions over testimony. The Supreme Court of Canada upheld her conviction of second-degree murder in June 2009, finally putting an end to the lengthy legal case. The Parole Board of Canada granted Ellard continued day parole on July 14, 2021. In the media, this sparked Ellard has since changed her name and has had 2 children with her spouse. Ellard has since changed her name and has had 2 children with her spouse and maintained the conditional orders of her parole, which include staying away from drugs and alcohol and not contacting the Verk family. But the question remains, why did a group of teenagers murder the young teen? Rena Verk? One supposed motive for the murder was revenge. Rena had lived in a group home with two of the girls involved in the beating. They accused her of stealing one of the girls' phone books and calling people and starting rumors. Another girl said that she was mad at Rena for stealing her boyfriend. In 2000, Rena's parents sued the teenagers involved, as well as the British Columbia government and other parties. Society doesn't make people take responsibility for their actions. This is one way to make them responsible, Rena's father said. Rena's murder prompted nationwide conversations around racism and bullying, specifically bullying perpetrated by young girls. Rena's parents started several anti-bullying campaigns and inclusion programs after their daughter's death and pushed British Columbia schools to implement anti-bullying measures. They spoke about bullying to students, teachers, and law enforcement professionals, and in 2009, they were honored with British Columbia's Anthony J. Home Award of Distinction for their efforts in crime prevention and community safety. In 2012, Rena's mother spoke about her daughter's death and the impact that bullying has on young people. For so long, we were consumed with the legalities of dealing with our murdered child, the courts prolonging the cases, and it's kind of like you put your feelings and your grief on hold. And now I'm finding that I'm feeling more of the impact of losing Rena, the emotions and feelings. So actually, I'm struggling more now and missing her more. I'm sad to say that the severity and the frequency of bullying are increasing instead of decreasing. And also, I think we're all shocked by the means that young people are using to bully their peers with cyberbullying and texting, and all of these things that were not there when Rena was killed. Over the years, Rena's story has been told many times and in many ways. It was covered in her father's book, Rena A. Father's Story, as well as in Rebecca Godfrey's book, Under the Bridge. It also inspired the play, The Shape of a Girl by Joan MacLeod, as well as the novel The Beckoners by Carrie Mack. It's covered in classrooms of high schools, colleges, and universities as a lesson on the often overlooked violence, racism, and bullying that young people, especially young girls, are capable of. As Rena's father said, the world will be a better place when all people will accept everyone. Bernd Lehmann, originally from Germany, moved to Australia in the 1960s and later became an Australian citizen. Residing in Ashfield, a suburb in the inner west of Sydney, he worked as a caretaker for disabled individuals. On February 12, 2008, Bernd was scheduled to fly back to Germany on a 4:55 p.m. flight from Sydney, intending to spend 3 months there to care for his critically ill mother. However, he did not board his flight and was found dead in the kitchen of his apartment on Alternate Street around 7 p.m. on Valentine's Day, 2 days after his planned departure. Authorities placed Bernd's time of death between 11:50 a.m. and the time he should have boarded his flight on 12th. He had died as a result of severe injuries to his head, and there were signs of a frenzied. The belief Bernd had been struck in the head approximately 20 times with a 6-pound statue, and that his killer had subsequently made an unsuccessful attempt to him with a knife from the kitchen. Robbery was eliminated as a motive as nothing was stolen from the apartment. Police suspected, based on the extent of the injuries inflicted to Bernd and the rage that must have been behind them, that there was some sort of emotional motivation to the crime. To investigate the murder, Strike Force Nava was created, bringing together detectives from Burwood Police Area Command and the State Crime Command's Homicide Squad. A $100,000 reward was offered for information in the case, and investigators followed up on Bernd's known friends and associates looking for potential suspects, but years would drag on with no arrests. A coronial inquest into the case was held in 2012, after which the case was sent to the Unsolved Homicide Unit. In 2018, investigators revisited DNA collected at the crime scene. The new review was initially conducted by the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Technology Command, and the samples were then sent to the Genetic Ancestry Laboratory maintained by the University of Canberra and the University of Technology Sydney to undergo DNA phenotyping. The laboratory was able to confirm that the DNA came from a male, but not from Bernd's Niemann. Their analysis found that the contributor of the DNA probably did not have blonde hair or blue eyes and was most likely of mixed European, Middle Eastern, and African ancestry. Unfortunately, there was no match to the DNA on file. Because it was a violent crime, they left a lot of forensic evidence behind, and that was exposed in our benefit. Danny Doherty, New South Wales Police Homicide Squad Commander, would later say, DNA was found on 8 cigarette butts left in Burns' lounge and in semen on his body. According to Detective Superintendent Doherty, it's not just DNA, it's where it's found in the unit, and it's found in places where it gives us confidence that this person will be charged later on. In February of 2021, police announced that New South Wales government was increasing the reward for information in the case to $1 million in a renewed effort to generate tips from the public. Less than a month later, on March 17, 2021, 66-year-old Najee Fakhruddin was arrested outside his home in Arncliffe at 7:30 in the morning and was later formally charged with Bernd Lehman's murder. Fakhruddin had initially come to the attention of the authorities, thanks to information received from a member of the public. However, he was initially only known to them as an unnamed associate. Police were later able to use what they have described as innovative techniques to identify him and match his DNA to the DNA found at the crime scene. Due to ongoing court proceedings, authorities have not been able to provide details on these methods and techniques. However, one of Fakhruddin's 8 children is a high-ranking member of a motorcycle gang and is currently incarcerated for drug trafficking. This would give authorities access to his DNA, which means it is possible that police were then led to his father through familial DNA. Following his arrest, the elder Fakhruddin was brought in for questioning and for further forensic testing. Police would later say that bloody finger and palm prints left on the statue believed to be the murder weapon also tied Fakhruddin to the crime scene. Police believed that Bernd and Fakhruddin were casual acquaintances. A motive has not been firmly established. Detective Superintendent Doherty could not elaborate on what police believed the motive to be due to the ongoing court proceedings, but did reiterate that robbery had excluded as a motive. When asked by the media if Bernd's sexuality had some role in the motive, Detective Superintendent Doherty could not exclude that possibility. Fakhruddin appeared before the Sutherland local court on March 17th. He did not enter a plea and was denied bail by the court. His next court appearance is scheduled for May. For Bernd to die in such a violent way after spending his life caring and helping others, this Fakhruddin's arrest. We hope that this will be the first step for his friends here and his family in Germany to get some closure and to find out why this happened. Mildred Matheny was born on February 27, 1907 in Arkansas and was one of 6 children. Her father died of heart attack when she was young, leaving Mildred's mother to raise the children on her own. As an adult, Mildred married, had a son, and became a nurse. According to her son, Gary, she was articulate and thrifty. She was talented at cooking and at sewing and could make shirts for her son out of hog feed bags that he claimed were nicer than any once available at any store. Mildred worked for 40 years as a psychiatric nurse in Little Rock and was dedicated to her family. These two aspects of her life would intersect, and she would provide care for her brother when his mental state began to decline. Unfortunately, Mildred began losing her own mental faculties when she was in her 70s, and she herself required help from her siblings. Mildred, now a widow, moved to Lake Worth, Florida to live with her younger sister, Gladys Nowlin, when she began suffering from dementia. Mildred could not leave home on her own because her condition would cause her to become disoriented and get lost. She did leave the home on her own on a few occasions and would wander around the neighborhood requiring help to get back home. She would often be found near a laundromat close to her sister's house. On April 27, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred again somehow got out of the house on her own. Witnesses reported seeing her walking in the neighborhood sometime between 3:30 and 4 p.m., wearing an orange blouse over her pink pajamas. Upon realizing that Mildred had gotten out of the house, Mildred's sister Gladys went to the laundromat where Mildred had wandered off to in the past. She was not there. Gladys could not find Mildred in the neighborhood, so she reported her missing at 4:30 p.m. Just before 10 p.m. that same night, a passerby traveling on Old Indiantown Road near 125th Avenue in Jupiter, approximately 30 miles north of Lake Worth, discovered Mildred along a dirt road. Mildred was unconscious, having been severely beaten. Police would later say that they believed her head had been beaten with a blunt object. She was naked, and her clothes and blood-stained dentures were found nearby. She had been raped. Mildred was rushed to Martin Memorial Hospital in Stuart, Florida. Her son Gary rushed to Florida from his home in Arkansas to be with her. Mildred died as a result of her injuries on May 8, 1985, 11 days after she was attacked. The medical examiner ruled her death caused by a heart arrhythmia stemming from her injuries, including a skull fracture and internal bleeding. Witnesses reported seeing Mildred near the intersection of Dixie Highway and Lucerne Avenue, less than 2 miles from her home. She had gotten into a brown, two-door, 1967 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a white interior, driven by a man who told the witnesses that he was her neighbor and would be driving her home. Despite having such a specific description of his vehicle and of the man himself from the witnesses, police in 1985 could not identify the man. Mildred's case went cold despite police revisiting the case and issuing new appeals to the public for information over the years. In March of 2021, the DNA profile extracted from vaginal swabs taken from Mildred was entered into the combined DNA index system and a match was found. Police obtained a warrant for a new DNA sample and then visited the home of the man whose DNA matched that from Mildred's rape kit, taking a new cheek swab to confirm the match. Testing of the DNA from that swab confirmed that it was this suspect's DNA found on the swab from the rape kit. On April 22, 2021, 61-year-old Richard Curtis Lang Sr. of Boynton Beach, Florida was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and sexual assault with bond at the Palm Beach County Jail. Lang has a criminal record, which includes aggravated assault convictions in 1983 and 1993. He has faced minor drug charges as well as gun charges in 2006 and 2012. He has never served more than a short jail sentence. He was obligated to provide a sample of his DNA in 2006 after he pleaded guilty to a charge of carrying a concealed weapon and was given probation. His arrest record lists his current occupation as disabled. Lang's attorney, Scott Skier, says his client vehemently denies any involvement in the crime. We look forward to aggressively challenging the forensic evidence attributed to Mr. Lang. Nothing in Mr. Lang's past indicates a propensity for such abhorrent behavior, Mr. Skeeter said in a statement. Now 88 years old, Mildred's son Gary Matheny had given up hope that his mother's killer would be found, and was overjoyed to learn that such a major development had finally been made in her case. It's been a long time, and I'm thankful to the cold case people for finding that dastardly SOB. It was a terrible death for my mother, he said following Lang's arrest. 59-year-old Virginia Hannon was a widow who lived alone on West Street in Pembroke, Massachusetts. For many years, she worked as a cook and lunch lady at Bryantville Elementary School. Her love of children and of food extended beyond her work, and she was known to bake treats to give out to the children who lived in her neighborhood. She also had a love of animals and cared for stray dogs and cats. According to her family, she was a happy person who was always fun to be around. She loved her community and was dedicated to her family. On February 13, 1984, Virginia's body was found on her bed, covered by a sheet. Police believed she had been killed the night before on February 12th. She had been stabbed once in the eye and 6 times in the abdomen, kicked so hard that a shoe imprint was left on her body, and strangled with nylon stockings. Virginia's murder was the first in Pembroke in a decade, and it came as a shock to her community. Her family was heartbroken to lose such a kind woman in such a brutal fashion. Police initially theorized that Virginia had been killed during a botched break-in. Virginia had recently retired from her job at the school after inheriting $380,000 from her aunt who had lived in California. Virginia never flaunted her wealth, still driving her old car and being thrifty with her purchases. However, she had told friends about the money, so word of it may have spread through town, and Virginia's killer may have come to her home to try to steal some of her newfound wealth. Police launched an extensive investigation and interviewed more than 50 people, but no arrests were made and the case went cold. Authorities continued to revisit it, and Virginia's family worked to keep the case alive, holding vigils for Virginia as recently as 2019 to mark the 35th on broken glass from Virginia's door, bloody paper towels left in her home, and the stalking used to strangle Virginia all came from the same man. They then tried to use genetic genealogy to identify potential suspects, but the effort was unsuccessful. An unexpected phone call would soon change the course of the investigation, and on March 18, 2021, Plymouth County District Attorney Tim Cruz announced that Virginia's case had finally been solved. He identified the person whose DNA was found at the scene and who his office believed to be Virginia's killer as Jesse Aylward. Aylward had been 22 years old at the time of Virginia's murder and had a criminal record that detailed crimes committed between the mid-1980s and mid-1990s. Authorities did not release details of this record beyond stating that it included what they described as some assaultive behavior. Aylward had come to investigators' attention on February 4, 2020 when one of his friends, whose identity is being withheld, called them. The informant told them that in early 2019, Aylward had admitted to killing a woman in Pembroke many years earlier. They had called in this information on that day because Aylward had died the day before. The informant was interviewed and is not facing any charges related to the case. Because Aylward had just died when investigators learned of his confession, his body was still at Brockton Hospital where he had passed away, and they were able to obtain a DNA sample from it. His DNA was ultimately found to be a match to the DNA found on the various items from the crime scene. Between the statement from the witness and the DNA evidence, District Attorney Cruz is confident that Aylward was responsible for Virginia's death even though Aylward is not alive to face charges in court. While Virginia's family is grateful to finally have answers in her case, they do wish that Aylward had been held responsible for her murder. His death also prevents them from trying to get him to reveal the motive for the crime. They are hoping that Aylward, being publicly identified, will encourage people who knew him to re-examine their memories and report any information they may have about Aylward or why he committed such a seemingly senseless and brutal crime. Somebody will remember, I believe, Virginia's nephew, Richard Hannon, said at the district attorney's press conference. Somebody will be brave enough to come forward. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.